Okay. So, hi everybody. My name is Avishai, and I want to tell you a story first. This story is about this agronome, Israeli agronome, and this guy wanted to do some good in the world, and he joined this NGO, and he was shipped off to Cambodia, where, as you know, there's a big problem with growing food and stuff. And he was sent to this remote village where they still do agriculture, like you see here on this picture, the manual way, like they did 2,000 years ago. Not a lot of improvement since then. And they have a big problem with food. And he tried to improve that situation. And because, you know, in Cambodia, you can't really put into tractors and heavy machinery into use because, you know, you don't have any fuel, you don't have any spare parts, and so on. All he could do, really, was introduce new methods, like growing different crops or growing them in different order, you know, better ways of irrigation, that kind of stuff. And he did, and after a while, he actually saw some success. You know, after the first year, there was some growth in production, and after the second year, they actually had a surplus. And for a Cambodian villager to have a surplus, that's not an easy thing. It's not something they see every day. Most of them don't actually have enough food, not to mention a surplus. And they had a surplus for the first time in the history of this village. And what do you do with the surplus? You sell it, of course. And for the first time in the history of this village, they actually had money. And if you're a Cambodian villager that just came into some money for the first time of your life, what would you do with it? Anybody? Yeah, I can tell you what they did. Hookers, gambling, drugs, alcohol, that kind of stuff. It created a lot of problems, as you can imagine. Families broke up. You know, people started fighting all the time, and within 3 years, the village was completely abandoned. So yeah, it's a kind of a sad story. In Israel, we have a saying, it's, the operation succeeded, but the patient died. It's kind of like that, I guess. So why am I telling you this story? The reason I'm telling you this story is you have to consider that when you introduce a new technology or a new methodology into your business or organization, you need to think about the cultural and organizational implications of what you're doing. And people often ignore that. So this talk is Continuous Delusions. It's about continuous delivery, but it's not going to be like any other continuous delivery talk you've heard about. This is not a talk about tools. This is not a talk about technology per se. This is a talk about culture and organizational change. I would like you to keep one thing in your mind during this talk, and that is quality over quantity. So just keep it in your mind. So, everybody's talking about continuous delivery and about continuous deployment. It's like wherever conference you go to, like Velocity or DevOpsDays or whatever, everyone's talking about continuous delivery. We actually had a couple of talks about this yesterday. And, you know, it's very important and it's very good. And if you want to introduce continuous delivery to your company, often the first time you hear about it is in a conference much like this one. And, you know, this CEO or CDO or, you know, whatever, goes to this conference, hears about continuous delivery, and now this company went from deploying, you know, once a month to 10 times a day. And you're thinking, oh, this is awesome. This could really help us. We want to do this. I mean, our deployment currently is very, very painful. You know, stuff breaks all the time, and we have to roll back. And it's so slow. I mean, we have to move faster. The business has to move faster. You hear that stuff all the time. We want to introduce this into our company. And what do we need to introduce this into our company? We need stuff like automated testing, continuous integration tools like Jenkins, configuration management, deployment tools, all that automated cool stuff that you keep hearing about in conferences. And, you know, he's writing all this down in his notebook. And, you know, he's going to bring this into his company. And when he goes back, he gathers everybody around the room and saying, let's commit ourselves to this effort. And, you know, in 6 months, we're going to have 10 deployments a day. We're going to automate everything. We're going to make everything, you know, work flawlessly. We're going to have tests. We're going to have builds. We're going to have everything. And we're going to have continuous delivery in our company. And they commit themselves. And, you know, slowly things actually begin to improve. Finally, they have builds. They have good builds. They actually have integration. They have tests. You know, they hire some new DevOps guys to automate all the servers and to introduce, you know, some deployment automation and configuration management, all that stuff. And the business is actually moving faster. Finally, developers can actually deploy to production. It's no longer this tedious manual process. And you start to get results. Finally, the business can actually go to this developer and say, you know what, I need this feature in two weeks, and it actually happens. You don't have to wait the full quarter anymore. And it's awesome. Until one day, when shit hits the fan, as it always does. Because in every production system, you always have issues and stuff breaks all the time, and it's just a matter of time until something like this happens. But this time, it's different. Because this time, it's so much harder to bring the system back up. You find that it's such a mess. And it wasn't used to be like that. It wasn't that hard to debug the system. Now it's suddenly so hard. And now it's suddenly so hard to get people to work together on debugging the system. And again, it wasn't so hard. Your monitoring used to be so good, and now you can't see anything anymore. And this is actually something we've observed in several companies that introduced continuous delivery. It's not a fragment of my imagination, unfortunately. And when you start, to drill down into it, like on a post-mortem after this disaster, what you find is that everybody's at each other's throat. Like you always had this departmental blame game within your corporation, where developers said something like, well, it worked on my machine, and the guy from ops said, well, it doesn't work on the server, and the guy from QA said, hey, it didn't pass QA, I don't care, and all that stuff. But now it's so much worse, because everybody's like, oh wait, that was automatic. I don't know what that stuff is. It's somebody's fault. I don't even know who. And the DBA team usually completely fenced off from everything. They don't we don't know what's going on in this pipeline. It has nothing to do with the database. The data's fine. We don't care. So it's a big mess, really a big mess. And the question is, how do you get to this point where a tool and a methodology that was supposed to help us improve the business hurt us so much? So the explanation that I think is correct is this: Conway's Law. If you never heard about Conway's Law, basically the law states that organizations are constrained to building systems that mirror the communication patterns of the organizations that build them. And the canonical example of this is a compiler, where if you have 4 different teams building a compiler, you're going to get a 4-stage compiler. And we see this every day on continuous delivery as well. If you have a company built from 4 different teams, ops, developers, QA, DBAs, you're going to go to 4-stage deployment no matter how you build it. This is how it's going to be built. This is Conway's Law. And the problem is, you're trying to introduce a process that is cross-cutting the company into a company that is siloed. And you're actively breaking Conway's Law. You're trying to work against the communication patterns of the organization, and that's going to fail. So, a great example of this is suddenly you have a time problem. You're deploying like every 15 minutes or so, or the deployment process suddenly takes 10 minutes, but just opening a ticket and getting a response could take like half a day. So if you're not shipping monitoring with your code, you deploy something, you open a ticket for the monitoring team to provide monitoring for that feature, but it's lagging way behind. Monitoring is going to be introduced like a day later, maybe a month later. So eventually you have such a big backlog in your monitoring work that your monitoring is shitty. And it happens with everything that isn't automated and isn't included in the code. Once you have to cross this boundary between departments, you suddenly have such a big time difference. So we think that maybe tools can help here. But it turns out that they can't do really much. They can't really do much. You can't fix culture with tools. You can't fix organizational structure with tools. Tools can help, but tools can also be abused. So that's probably not the answer. And another problem we see often is careless automation. And the problem with automation is that automation basically means hard coding your assumptions. You're basically writing down the assumptions you have about reality and how the computer should react to those assumptions. Like, if the CPU on my autoscaling group crosses the 90% boundary, launch more servers. If it has less than 30%, then shut down some servers. That's an assumption we've hard-coded. Is it always correct? No. Sometimes the database is gone, the database is crashed, CPU goes down because there's nothing to do, and your automation starts turning servers off. That's probably not what you wanted it to do. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't automate, I'm saying that you have to automate. But you need to think about how you automate and what interfaces you provide to human operators, the people who are in charge of automation. That's very important. And if you forget the human side of automation, you're going to have lots of problems. And with continuous delivery, because you need so much automation for it, people just introduce lots of automation without thinking about that stuff. But the biggest problem of all is wrong goals. Do you remember that sentence about 10 deployments a day that I said before? And this is something that we see a lot. This manager comes and goes to a company and says, we want to be deploying 10 times a day. And that's a big problem. Because where did the number 10 come from? Is this a business goal? Do the customers care about this? How is this related to customers' needs? This is a forced goal. And forced goals would make your company and make your employees do a lot of stuff that are both wasteful and hurtful to your business. It's basically going to bend the entire company towards, basically irrelevant stuff. You're going to try to make your deployment faster, although you might not need it. You're going to reduce quality. So what goal should we have? This is a better goal. We should be able to deploy whenever we need to. Because when you need to deploy, for example, if you need a patch or a rollback in production, you know that you need it now. You can't wait, you can't delay it, and you sure as hell don't care what was before or after. You don't care about the rate anymore, you just care about now. So this is a goal that clearly reflects the business needs. And this is where you should be. You shouldn't be forcing yourself to deploy 10 times a day. You should know that you're able to deploy right now if you need to. So this is basically, sorry. Yeah, browsers. Okay, so this is basically the whole quality over quantity principle in a sentence. So the delusion about continuous delivery is that people think that because deployment is hard, continuous delivery will make it easier. And that's not true. And why is it not true? To understand why it's not true, we should ask ourselves, why was deployment so hard to begin with? This was the reason we introduced continuous delivery to begin with, so why was it so hard? That's one of the most common reasons. Your deployment breaks the system, but did deployment break the system because of the deployment, or was the system fragile? It often turns out that the system is fragile, and it would break if you turned off a server, it would break if database performance degraded, it would break if you kicked the server, and of course it breaks when you deploy. It breaks because the system is fragile, not because of the deploy. Inflexible architecture. If you're deploying a lot, it means that you're making changes in your system, and your architecture needs to support that. It needs to be flexible. It needs to allow you to introduce changes. It's the same as within your code, where you want to be able to change libraries easily. So you build architecture to support it. And a lot of people, when they build architecture, don't think about deployments. So their architecture is a problem, not the deployment. But the biggest problem of all is mentality and culture. When you're deploying and you're making changes to the system, you're also making changes to your organization. If you're introducing new features that require different departments to work differently with each other, you're making changes in your organization and in your culture. And if your culture doesn't support it, if the architecture of your company doesn't support it, you're going to have lots and lots of problems. So those were a bunch of systemic issues, basically. And as we can see, the problems we have with deployment are all systemic. And you can't cure systemic issues with tools. automation. You need to deal with them systemically. So let's go back to basics and understand what continuous delivery is about. So we know why we want to introduce it, not introduce it to solve a completely different problem that had nothing to do with it. So continuous delivery, for me at least, is about shipping small increments. It's faster and it's safer. It's about fast feedback loops, which is what DevOps is about, really. It's about continuous improvement, and we need the feedback loops for it. We need to deploy, make a change to our business, see what goes on, see how we monetized, then use that knowledge to improve further. It's about less inventory, because code you just wrote and you haven't shipped yet, that's just sitting there and you're not monetizing on it. You don't want to keep it. It's inventory. It's not making any money. It's liability. And operational flexibility. If you're able to make changes to your business, changes to your code, it means you have a great operational flexibility. You can respond fast to changes in the market. You can respond fast to changes in your system. If something breaks, you can fix it by using a deploy. So this is why you want to have continuous delivery. So let's talk about feedback. This is the part that most people forget about deployment. Because we said it's a feedback loop. And people only tend to one part of the loop. They tend to the part that delivers code from development to production. But they don't care about the other part of the loop, the part that brings data back to you. And if we want to complete that loop, it's very important that we get feedback. We need monitoring. And monitoring should be treated as a product feature. It needs to be treated as a feature of continuous delivery. We need to make sure that we can compare version A and version 2. If we're doing, green-black deployments, or if we're doing like A/B testing, we need a way to measure, was A better than B? We need analytics for it, of course, and we need metrics. But we shouldn't forget that hands-on experience is also very important, because that's how we humans work. You should also consider that you're going to get concurrent deploys. And the reason for that is very simple. We know when a deployment started. It started when we pressed the button. But the end of the deploy is completely subjective. Has the deploy ended when all the servers rebooted? Has the deploy ended when you started getting traffic to those servers? Has the deploy ended when you got the first bug? What if you didn't get a bug? So we don't really know when a deployment ends. It's a decision that we have to make. And that means that you're going to get concurrent deploys. Even if you're deploying once a day, conceptually, you're going to get concurrent deploys. And this is something that we have to know about and we have to support. For example, if somebody calls your support team and says, I had a problem, something didn't work, what version was he on? Was he routed to version A or to version B? We need a way to figure that out, and that needs to be built in. It's going to have cross-company effects. And that example about support basically means the support staff also needs to know that you're deploying. And they need to know that you're deploying concurrent versions. They need to know that you're deploying continuously. And you need to provide tools for them to work with those versions, to track those versions and those changes. It's going to have effects across the company. Product managers need to know about this. Support staff need to know about this. Everybody needs to know about this. So it's very important that we build everything in a way that affects the whole company and supports the whole company. So the bottom line. The bottom line is that continuous delivery and continuous deployment is about control. It's about orchestration. It's about making changes in a controllable way. It's about monitoring telemetry. It's about getting feedback. And it's about understanding system behavior, because deployment is basically changing the dynamics of the system. So it's very important that we understand how what we're doing affects the system. It's about architecture. It's about an architecture of your system that supports changes and promotes changes. It's about an architecture that is not fragile and can withstand the changes. But most importantly, it's about culture. It's about mentality. It's about a culture of Kaizen, continuous improvement. It's about a culture of DevOps. So, thank you very much. And I would like to send you off with a quick sentence by John Seddon. John Seddon is from Vanguard, is like a demigod in my opinion anyway. And that sentence is, if you try to reduce costs, costs will go up. If you try to improve quality, costs will go down. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Avishai. We have a few minutes if you have any quick questions for him.
Sorry? Continuous delivery? Yes, in quite a few systems actually. The biggest problem that we encounter usually is that people try to jump into this unprepared. They're not really aware of the implications of introducing continuous delivery. So even though technically it's sometimes very easy, for example, if you're using, we had this company that wanted to introduce continuous delivery and they were using PHP and Git. And basically all you need to do is, implement a few hooks with Git and you get continuous delivery. But since they had no tests, for example, that would have been disastrous. So the problem isn't really technological.
All right. Any other questions?
Would it be correct to say that one of the topics you're raising in your talk is do not jump into continuous deployment or continuous delivery, but actually look at why your things are painful and fix them slowly without jumping in, and then you can actually get the culture going as you fix it. Is that a good summary? Like one of the points you were mentioning? At least that's what I understood.
Yeah, that's definitely one point. I'm basically saying that DevOps in general is an organizational change. It's a cultural change. And it also means that you definitely should fix the problems you have right now before jumping into, imaginary solutions and new methodologies that are supposed to fix your problems, but really are something completely different. And in general, it's better to work on the culture of your company. Think about growing a culture and growing an organization instead of growing a product, because that's really what you're doing.
All right. Any more questions? All right. Thank you very much. So once more, I'd like to advertise you the offer of the day. Completely free. You will have about 200 consultants at your disposal, completely for free. So make use of them, put your topic proposals on the open space board. Next in the program, next part of the program will be conducted by Jouni Toivonen, so it's the lunch break. And I suppose it works just the same as yesterday, so it starts from the middle of the table. And then on the right-hand side this time will be the meat, and on the left-hand side will be veggie and shrimp. And so pick a drink, pick a roll, and then some dip sauce there. And we'll continue 12:30. Thank you.
And I feel like put your middle fingers up.